Hey, this is me, and this is how I make pink Ormus. For it, I use pink Himalayan rock salt, dead sea salt, sodium hydroxide diluted with water, a mortar and pestle to grind up the Himalayan salt, a measuring cup and a wooden spoon to stir it up, a pH meter that goes to 2 decimal places, a glass jar to mix it all together, and lots of distilled water. So first part of what I do is I measure out 100 grams of Himalayan rock salt, pink Himalayan rock salt. And then what I do next is I measure out half of it into the mortar and pestle, which is so about 50 grams, and then I proceed to grind it up. I do this to make sure that it's easy to dissolve when it comes to making the Ormus. I give it a real thorough grind, so it saves me a lot of time and effort when I'm mixing it in water. I don't skip on this part too, I just keep grinding and grinding, feeling it as I go. And then the end result is a nice fine powder. Here, I'll give you a look. So here we go, a nice fine Himalayan salt powder. I'm just checking for any lumps or maybe some rocks that I may have missed. Nope, there's nothing, so it's all good. It can go into the jar. And then I'll just put that aside while I grind up the rest of the salt. So it may take a little bit of time to grind it all up, but it ensures that you don't have any rocks left in your Ormus because the rocks didn't dissolve. So now that part is all ground up, time to add it to the jar. And once that's done, I will measure out my dead sea salt. So if I have 100 grams of Himalayan salt, then I have 100 grams of dead sea salt. Quite simple. Just a 1-to-1 ratio, 50-50 of each. So altogether I'm using 200 grams of salt, 100 grams of Himalayan rock salt, and 100 grams of dead sea salt. Now I already calibrated my pH meter before beginning, which I recommend to everyone, to make sure you have a nice accurate reading. And now I'm just going to add the distilled water. If you can't get distilled water, just try get the best quality water that you can get from your local store or from your home. Maybe you can use rainwater. And I just fill it up just so it starts touching the pH meter sensor, because I'm going to start adding sodium hydroxide, and what happens is if I've overfilled the distilled water from the beginning, then it's going to start going too high up on the pH meter. Okay, now I start mixing it all together, making sure all the salt is nicely dissolved. As you can see, the water is quite pink already, so obviously that's from the Himalayan salt. So I have sped this up a bit just to save time in the video. Even though I've ground up the rock salt, it still takes a bit of time to dissolve. It's quite a hard salt, whereas the dead sea salt, it dissolves fairly easy. So I put the pH meter back in. It's just touching the top of the waterline there. And now I begin to add my sodium hydroxide. So this first bottle, it has a sodium hydroxide percentage of about 25%. Probably more like 20 to 25%. And this is to start to raise the pH, but to raise the bulk of the pH. I'm going to raise it up to 10.78. And I'm just adding a little bit at a time and watching the pH meter. And then when I start seeing it get up to about 10.3 pH, 10.4 pH, I'm going to switch bottles, which you'll see me do in a second. And as you can see, the mixture is becoming cloudy. Okay, here's the second bottle. This has about a sodium hydroxide percentage of about 10%. So this is to make sure I don't raise the pH up too quickly and go over 10.78. I want to make sure I stay under that level so nothing toxic is released into my Ormus batch. Okay, so now I must be getting close. The video is slowed down. Yep, it's looking nice and cloudy. I just recommend to everyone not to rush your Ormus. When you're making it, don't rush it. Okay, here it is, 10.74. So I'm under 10.78. Okay, we'll see it was dropping between 7.3 and 7.4. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little bit more to get a bit closer. So I'm going to stir it up nice and thoroughly, making sure it's all legit. Okay, I'm satisfied with that. Just give the pH meter a quick wipe. I'll give it a rinse later, but just for now, just give it a wipe. Okay, now I'm going to wrap it in aluminum foil just to protect it from any EMF radiation or so yeah, I measured up the aluminum foil and now just wrapping it around the jar, and I'll just fold over the top to cover it. And now I'm going to leave this for 8 hours. Here it is, I've come back 8 hours later, and as you can see, the Ormus has all fallen to the bottom of the jar. And there it is, the pink Ormus. So the next part of the process is to decanter that top level of water, because what we need to do next is rinse the Ormus. I like to rinse my Ormus about 4 or 5 times. In my older videos, when I was first making Ormus, I was only rinsing it 3 times, but I found 4 or 5 rinse cycles much better. So I'm just decantering this top water. I'm just using a hose to siphon it off. Quite easy. Make sure you got a nice thin hose. Don't use anything too thick, or it could shake up the Ormus. Once most of that top water is off, I'm just going to fill it back up with distilled water, give it a stir, and then replace the aluminum foil, and then do this rinse cycle another 4 times. Here it is the next morning, looking nice and pink. There's the final product. Press like if you enjoyed. See you next time.